afternoon, and thank you so much for attending, and to our wonderful panel, and joining us today in this not so sexy discussion when it comes to mitigating risk and, always looking to vet suppliers and still having that duty of care. So, duty of care always remains in this temporary housing environment. It's so critical, and it's often being challenged now between geopolitics. We got information security. We have new recent dynamic legal type frameworks. So, but before we dive in, I do want to take a moment for the panelists to tell us who you are, so the audience gets to know you a little bit, what your function is, and then maybe a little bit about your program and your journey.
Hello, my name is Jose Lucena. I'm the Global Mobility and Relocation Manager for Halliburton. I had been with the company for 17 years. I started there actually as an intern, so it has been the only company that I had worked with. I have let's say a mid-high international program. We have around 4,000 international assignees, and we do around 2,000 moves a year all around the globe and domestically.
Wonderful. Morgan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Morgan Crosby. I'm ARINC's Chief Strategy Officer. If you don't know ARINC, we are a global mobility data and consulting firm. I've also never worked anywhere else except for ARINC, but maybe for a bit longer than you, Jose. We won't say how long. And I did start at ARINC as a cost of living surveyor. And if you don't know what that role is, you literally get to go around the world and write down like the price of a loaf of bread or research the cost of a one-bedroom apartment. And let me tell you, in the late 90s, doing that in places like Kazakhstan was pretty interesting, before cell phones. But anyway, I'm dating myself. But now I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at ARINC. And one of the roles I have is I lead our global consulting and benchmarking practice. So I can share a lot of those insights with you all today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Vlad.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Vlad Dziak, and I'm a head of global workforce deployment and mobility, a little bit of a complex term. But I have been working for a couple of years now to really rebrand mobility, that it's not just about the relocation, critical component, but it's much bigger. It's about the cross-border compliance. So very interesting to hear from the previous panel as well. I have been in mobility for 15 plus years. You can hear I'm not American based on my accent. Same part of the world at Carolina, so born in Czechoslovakia, Slovak passport at the moment. Important to notice. 8 years with Liberty Mutual. We have a mid-sized program domestically, internationally, and over 300 sponsored workers as well.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for sharing the stage today and your knowledge and your background. We're so looking forward to this discussion. So that being said, can you each, and Jose, we'll start with you, share a phrase, a word, or what comes to mind when you think about risk in corporate housing today, and share with us what your thoughts are.
I will say that when we were preparing for the panel, the first thing that came to mind when we were talking about risk was duty of care. Because for us, especially in my company, we are known as the execution company, and sometimes people think that if you are the execution company, you are just thinking of doing things as quick as possible with no quality controls, with no risk controls, and that's the total opposite. For us, we try to do everything at the highest quality level and with the highest duty of care, not only for our employees, but also for our clients, for our partners, etc. So for us, duty of care is really important. And when we talk about the housing market, right now you can find a lot of platforms where you can get bookings pretty quickly on the internet. There's a lot of AI platforms. There's a lot of places like Airbnb right now. But when you think of duty of care, those places are not really protecting your employees. They are not really vetting what they are doing. They are not really looking for the locations where your employees are going to stay. Is the location a safe place, etc.? That's why in the housing market is temporary housing market or even permanent housing market, you need to work with vetted suppliers, with people that actually has a high level of duty of care and that is able to mitigate the risk for your employees and for the company. Because not necessarily you need to think on convenience, you need to think on the well-being of the employee, and part of the well-being of the employee is to house them on a place that doesn't have any red flags.
Wonderful, thank you. That's very well said. Morgan.
So my word is exposed, right? If you don't get this right, you're exposed and your employee is exposed. And you're exposed from a company level, from a cost standpoint. We heard some case studies today about how much money you can save when you think about your housing in the right way. At ARINC, we do budgets, and so getting that budget right is really important for the company and the company spend. But the employee is exposed if you don't put them in good quality housing. And the housing could be, obviously the safety and everything is paramount, but what if they don't feel comfortable? I mean, that's just awful. I have a client of mine who once told me that she got relocated to Dubai, and she had to fly in economy, mon Dieu, that's awful, with her husband and her 2 little kids. And they'd flown all the way from Houston, and in economy, crying babies. And they got into their corporate accommodation at 1 a.m. in the morning, and there was no food in there. The kids hadn't eaten. That's not a good way to get your assignment started. So exposed is my word if you just don't get this right.
That is, I see a lot of heads nodding in the audience. That's a very true story. So, and Vlad, how about you?
For me, the duty of care kind of comes or plays together with 3 components. It is the employee experience, and I don't like to use that word because it can hide a lot of things behind, but I was at the offsite last week, and we have been looking into some of the data, moments that matter during the relocation, and technology came as a number 1, and second was the temporary housing. So employee experience, really, we know that temp housing in a settling process truly matters. So looking into that. And the second comment that we had in relation to that, which we need to balance with the safety, security, our employees basically told us, we don't want to be told where we should stay, because that well-being is a very personal choice. So it's almost like, how do we balance, philosophical questions, that employee experience, maybe almost like a retail expectation. We don't want individuals to take to one shop. There might be people shopping online, very similar in a temp housing space. How do we expand the portfolio of the options to them, but at the same time being aware of, we as an insurance company, obviously, of the risk, security, safety, etc.
And that's a nice segue into our next slide, because it is about the retail experience, right? And it is about that duty of choice. So, and now we're going to kind of segue into the vetting of operators and how you can make this happen. So, Jose, I know you manage a very incredibly complex program, and you have a high stakes program. So, you, as a oil field provider, you're responsible for moving your colleagues to very remote or high risk locations, right? So, it makes sense that that duty of care is at the heart of everything you do. So when you think about, choosing a new housing provider, what is a thorough vetting process look like within your organization, and maybe a red flag that you've come across where there's been an immediate deal breaker with a housing provider?
In our case, I will say that transparency is everything. When you are doing a vetting process, not necessarily only for a housing provider, but for any provider that is working with you, they need to be able to provide you clear information about pricing, about the locations that they are operating, because you need to know where are your employees going to be. You need to be aware of the locations that they can operate with you. And this is really important because we work in more than 80 countries, so we have high-risk locations like Iraq, but we also have I would say safe locations like Argentina, Brazil, that they might be risks in some areas, but at the end of the day, it's a risk that is easy to mitigate, and you can still be able to provide a good experience for your employees. Now, when we are doing our whole vetting process to get a vendor. We do work in contact with our RNC. They are really good making sure that the vendors that we are working with, the vendors that we are using, pass all the quality controls and the levels that we do. And we also do an internal due diligence process to make sure that whatever vendor we are working with is a vendor that can work with us, because at the end of the day, we are an oil and gas company. We had relationships with a lot of government clients, etc. So we need to be rigorous about that. So that's why transparency is really important.
Wonderful, yeah. Absolutely. Now, Morgan, with your broad perspective on market dynamics and then the key considerations, what should clients keep in mind to strengthen their supply chain strategy, ensuring competitive cost efficiencies, and then of quality through effective vetting?
Yeah, so at AirInc, we really advocate for having a good budget when you go in to look for, corporate accommodation or serviced accommodation. And you need to have a good budget, because if you're spending too little, you can have risk. If you're spending too much, that's also risky. So when we're looking to establish those budgets, we want to make sure that the budgets are based on really good, sound data. So location, location, location. In real estate, it has to be a location that's safe, secure, commutable. It does have to be a good property that's safe for the employee to live in. And in many, we kind of take that for granted here in the U.S. There are many countries where there are only certain buildings or there's only certain gating requirements. You have to make sure that all of that's taken into consideration. And so, proximity to other expatriates or other international individuals is also really critical, because you don't want the person to feel isolated or alone or like they don't have a community. Right. We also talked, in preparing for this, that some different populations will also have different dietary needs or different cultural requirements, and you have to take that into consideration as well. Proximity to vegetarian outlets for Indian nationals, other things are critical. Don't just think that you're sending only U.S. outbound or what have you.
Exactly. You want them to get settled in well and stay. So thank you for that. And now, Vlad, during our discussion, you had a very interesting view on what temporary living operators should offer in today's DNA and moving beyond that kind of direct sense of duty of care. So how does Liberty Mutual ensure employees have that home away from home feel?
I'm going to talk a little bit about the scalability of the vetting process, and I will get into your question, because it is interesting that when I started at Liberty, we are, again, I mentioned, very focused on security and safety, and every single property have been always vetted by employee protection services, etc. But we struggle to make a proper reservation or employee make the right choice because of the timing. It just took too much time historically to have all the properties vetted, again, with the very strict requirements. And then being away of home has also specific components as part of vetting. We started to get questions about laundry units. Is it in the unit? Is it outside? If it's outside, will we be reimbursing the cost? Like very practical questions, or what that home should feel like. So 7 years ago, we really started with a simple spreadsheet to make sure that all the components, let's say security, safety, CCTV, reception 24/7, etc. So those security components have been merged with what employee expectations are. And we thought, okay, there is an online or whatever internet option. Well, we started to get questions. Is it optic internet? Is it fiber internet? Like, there was so much beyond what employees were asking. So we started to make really scalable process, and I think there are 55 components that we have for each property, including both safety features as well as the employee expectation or answer those questions. So as part of the booking and part of the pre-vetting process, all of those components are covered. So when we talk about the operators, we only offer solutions, or we try to offer solutions that are matching those requirements from a safety perspective and employee expectation.
It's wonderful. And yeah, they should feel safe and secure. And not every option fits all, right? It's always a choice. So I love that. So when it comes to our quality control and consistencies, and that kind of aligns with what you were just sharing, Vlad, So even with the best vetting, and that the real test is maintaining consistent quality, right? So how do you ensure properties meet standards, not just from day one, but throughout the long-term collaboration that you're working with? So Jose, how are you working with your ecosystems to verify that providers are delivering on the quality control promise, and how it's evolving with the latest trends?
So I'll say it's really important for you to be able to work with your ecosystem. So it's important for you to be able to trust your RNC, to trust the vendors that work with you, and that at the end of the day, they are the ones doing or being on the ground for your employee. But it's also important to have a strong internal control with your teams, and that's where your partners came into consideration. For example, we had a really strong quality control with corporate security. We do had some things that we work with our temporary housing and with our DSP, making sure that in all locations, not necessarily if the location is high risk or the risk is lower, that we are taking, it's really similar to what Vlad was saying, like taking into consideration several pinpoints that is not only security and safety, but it also includes everything that the employee might need or might want in the house. And funnily enough, that applies to every level of our employees. And we have a case that happened recently, a few years ago. One of our top executives, he wanted a specific place in a safe country that if you look at it immediately, it won't raise any issues. But when we did that quality control with corporate security and our vendors, it has several red flags. And we try to always be accommodating to our employees, but at the end of the day, we are a company and we need to make sure that our employees are safe. And if they still want to move forward with a property that for us, it may have 90% of the things that they might need, but there's a 10% that is still something that can be an issue, they need to sign off on it. And they need to be aware that whatever that happens, it was their decision. They are usually okay with that. In this specific case, it actually happened something. There was a break in the house for several of the things that we found, that it was pretty big. There was security cameras were lacking. It was on an open neighborhood. It was a really good neighborhood, but an open neighborhood. It wasn't gated. And as soon as that happened, that executive came to us and said, I should have listened to you since the beginning. You were doing the right thing for me. And he has been a really advocate for mobility and for everything that we do. Like, he has been one of the first persons that says, whenever there's an issue, I know them, they are good. If they are telling you to do this, it's because that's the best for you.
It's, wow, there are a lot of people, yeah. Now, Vlad, I know with Liberty Mutual, building trust and maintaining strong governance is absolutely critical. So we've been seeing a lot of growing trends of supply consolidation and strengthened control and compliance at the local level, along with the rising demand for on-site property inspections. This is kind of stems off with what Jose's story was. So how much of a priority is that for you when sourcing accommodation partners? And could you share an example of maybe how you've put those practices into place?
Yeah, so historically, we have been running international operations as opposed to our US operations, and now we truly strive for one global operating model. But it's almost push and pull approach, including local and global, those high words. But when we came from a governance standpoint and kind of came into local operations and said, we know what those properties should be because we have a great RMC and we have a great housing providers, etc., we experience a lot of resistance, let's say from our Madrid office historically or London office, where they say, we do have our set of properties for our business travel population, and you guys in Boston don't know exactly what our travelers in Madrid needs. So that was a very hard, and it's still a hard discussion, but we went into that collaboration phase. Like, we don't want to diminish all the local vetting, inspection relationship because it comes with a better price often. It comes often with the more perks that we could achieve at the global level. So for me, it was almost a mindset shift. I'm not going to be telling you how that governance should look like, but we will start really from the bottom. So like, you tell us what are the properties that you recommend or you experienced at the local level. Can we actually work up the chain? Do they meet the requirements? Sometimes they do, sometimes they're not. Same with the price. But we really changed that, and I think that completely shifted the mindset of our local operations. Similar to what you mentioned, is really that trust. They said, oh, even if the process is booked through Boston office, we know that local considerations have been taken in place. We know the property. We know that Liberty in London has a relationship with X, Y, and Z property, and we want to put these properties first. We don't want to be dismissive of what has been done at the local level.
Makes perfect sense. Now, Morgan, a little bit different. Our organizations share a lot of similarities when it comes to delivering thoughtful, high-quality technology, right? So, and the user experience. So when it comes to temporary housing, how does Air Inc. stay transparent about pricing commitments? And then what do you do when there's a disconnect between what was promised and then what the actual employee experience is?
Sure. There's nothing worse than an employee being dissatisfied about the accommodation that you're potentially putting them into, and they might scream pretty loudly. You might have had some of these exception requests before, yes? And so when that happens, what we will do is we actually have a housing research department that researches the cost on all of the corporate accommodation around the world. And if there's an exception request, we'll get on the phone with our researchers and we'll walk through what was priced, what's available, what's going on in the market, and support that fully. Now, occasionally, there can be an event going on somewhere and that will cause a price spike, and maybe it makes sense to make that exception. But oftentimes, it might be like one of our diva type people that you described, maybe just asking for something that's not reasonable. So we'll get on the phone, we'll try to get at the bottom of that to make sure that is this a legitimate exception request, or is it something that we don't think is appropriate.
And I think you said something also interesting in our initial conversations was ensuring that the budgets are realistic. You get what you pay for. So I think that's a very big word too.
Yes, I mean, unfortunately, some of this accommodation can be pretty expensive, right? Mm-hmm. And you can see it in a cost estimate. You see this big line item, hey, $25,000 for temp living, and somebody might come to you and say, that's crazy. Why are we spending $25,000 on temporary accommodation? And it's like, well, you've got a family of 4, they need to be in this location, they're not going to find their accommodation right away, and that can get picked on, right? And you really need to push back on that, because it seems like a big ticket item, but really, and we've talked about it, if you get that wrong, the whole assignment or transfer or relocation gets kicked off on the total wrong footing. So yes, I think that that's really important to push back on that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So critical. So now on to some funner stuff when we get to duty of care, right? So, and we're going to start with the AI aspect. I know we had a great panel on this earlier. So, Vlad, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this. So, we're hearing, again, a lot of the excitement, really more about those AI agents. That video was crazy that we saw earlier, and the potential to integrate across ecosystems. So in the context of corporate accommodation, how would AI be leveraged to streamline quality control and improve the overall guest experience?
I would probably start broader with the technology, because I know as an HR professional, we love to throw this AI as a word, but again, we need to go back to basic, and I think at the moment the technology, the platforms are very outdated out there with the providers, especially with the in-temp housing space. Lots of things are manual. There is lots of email communication. So before we even get into AI, I really think we need to work on the basis. It's the simple integration of the data, simple communication channels like APIs, like those things that we should have talked probably 6 years ago, but we haven't. So let's probably address that piece. And then when AI, I was actually this morning at one of the panel, I was thinking how much it can help to predict an escalation, or if there is an escalation, to use the resources, let's say in my team, for a proper consulting. If, let's say, and we had a situation in London recently where the temp housing accommodation didn't work out, so we had to shift, or provider had to shift a different option, and there was no elevator in the building. And it was a huge issue because that was a single mom with the children. six luggages that she was carrying, and there's nobody to help her, and that experience obviously was very detrimental for the overall experience and the program. How cool that would be if the AI could notify my team and say, well, there was a change in accommodation, there might be some issues, so let's authorize extra DSP or someone to help. So I love giving that example. I mentioned it several times. When we book a flight, we don't want to talk to anyone, right? You just book it. But once the flight is canceled, how helpful it is to be someone on the phone that can really rebook and help you. So I think it's kind of a very similar story to that, where AI will help a lot in the employee experience space, both predictive and then really address the issue right away.
Absolutely. No, again, heads nodding, lots of resonation, I think, with the audience, so thank you. And then, of course, we know that the duty of care phrase, like you said, kind of gets, tossed around a lot, but at the heart, it's really about, setting employees and their accompanying dependents, families, for success in their new environments, right? So from each of your perspectives, what are common practices that your organization does to ensure that smooth transition while supporting the overall well-being, which is huge, for those relocating or traveling just for work? Let's go ahead and start with you, Jose.
So I would say for us, and this is something that the prior panel also said at the end, like we are pretty big with our international population, with our expats that are traveling with their families, to do pre-move treats. For us, pre-move treats are really important because they not only help the expat to know where they are going to be, but also their families to know the location, the community before traveling, and that has help increase the success of the assignments, because we did have a lot of failed assignments, and that need to happen for my leadership to understand that that was important. That wasn't something that needed to be optional. It needed to be a core offer for our company, because we were seeing a lot of high costs of movements of employees that say yes because they were getting a lot of high premiums. When they got there, less than a week, I got a call, Jose, I need to go back because my wife is going to divorce me. I had those calls. And at the end of the day, we don't want to lose the talent. So it's not that we are going to release that employee, but that helped me to make the business case and say, look, all the amount of money that we are wasting, because it's basically like we cannot do anything. Like the goods were already on their way, so it's like the goods are entering the country. In some countries, once they enter, they cannot leave immediately, and if they leave, we need to pay high pricing in custom fees just to get them out. So that helped me to build that business case, and we are being able to do it in high-risk locations like Guyana and Suriname for my permanent transferees. So my permanent transferees, they also get to travel there with their family before accepting, because at the end of the day, we want for the employee to succeed. We want for them to be able to engage, for the family to be happy in the location that they are living, and for them to not have to worry about, I'm going to be without family because they are going to divorce me. And those things, like, it might sound funny, but it happens. And for us, it happens a lot until we said, not anymore. This is a core benefit that we are offering.
No, I mean, it's so true. And there should be a degree requirement within our organizations for also psychology or, counseling, because you get all of these stories and issues that come up, and it's terrifying. And you want to settle that employee in and have them a great experience. And that return on investment is huge. You don't want to be throwing millions of dollars away. So now, Morgan, you shared with some wonderful metrics here, and I kind of want you to share a little bit about this with us.
What's really great about this slide is since all of us have been talking today and we've been hearing from the different panelists, I've heard pretty much something about everything on this slide, right? So, when we're measuring success or defining what's successful about our mobility programs, we often don't set out to say what that is. But if we look at our statistics, you can see communication is the first thing that comes up here, right? And we've heard that so much today about communicating with your employees, whether it's what happened with H-1B or talking to them about what to expect when you arrive in a location. We cannot forget to communicate really well with our employees about what's going on, or the business business. We also heard a lot about flexibility and personalization. Does the employee feel like we took their needs into consideration when we sent them out into this location? So you can read the stats on this slide and see lots of the things and echoing what we've heard today. But one thing I think is, we've heard from Vlad and we've heard from Jose, and they're really good at what they do, right? So it seems effortless that they have all these things in place. But a lot of my clients, when I ask them, who at your organization is responsible for vendor relationships? And they go, I don't know. That's terrible. Like, if you don't do what Jose and Vlad are doing, which is having a relationship with your vendors, treating them like true partners, like a one team in your organization, they do not know what you are expecting out of them, and they don't know what the definition of success is, and you must tell them. So it's really important to be an activist part of your vendors and have a partnership with them, because it starts from there, and then that drives the good experience. Excuse me.
Absolutely, and I can share. I come from a long background of RMC. I've been on the corporate side. Now I get to be on the AltoVita side, which I'm so excited to kind of bring different hats into this. But I can share with you that when I'm working with my clients, having that word, "you're our extension," is a huge component of all this, and it does go a long way. So we've covered a lot today with this. I hope you found it very informative, and thank you, panelists, again. But ultimately, mitigating risk, it's not just about policies and checklists, it's about people, right? And it's their overall well-being that matters. So when we collaborate effectively and we get housing right, we're not just providing a place to stay, but we're creating safety, stability, and a sense of belonging for every employee and who's accompanying them on their assignments or travel. So thank you again, everyone. And I wish we had time for questions, but I know we want to get everybody to lunch. And we will be out eating with you, so please ask us. Okay, thank you.